Okay, I'm just going to introduce Link, but I'm going to let him speak more broadly. As Link, I just think of as this debonair Western taxonomist, crosses the Canadian-U.S. boundary a lot, now a kingpin on the Oregon Bee Atlas, doing lots of the identifications. And I'm going to turn it over to him to embellish that as much as he likes. And then we'll get into his talk, which I'm eager to hear. And thank you, Link.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Well, let's see. I'm Lincoln Best. I currently work for Oregon State University in the Faculty of Horticulture. I lead the Oregon Bee Atlas, and I provide services to all sorts of other labs, government agencies, and of course, I'm still really active in Western Canada working on a variety of projects. I've probably been studying bees for about 20 years, starting in undergrad, and starting in undergrad, after a few years, it just had continued to escalate, and so here I am surrounded by a lot of bee specimens. So today, I'll have a PowerPoint presentation going. I'll have a projection of my microscope, which is right here. It has a camera on top. I'm going to have to turn off my webcam in order to just try and save some bandwidth and ensure that this computer can handle all the different things that are going on. Well, if you have any bumblebee species and casts that are must-see, make sure you put those into the chat so I can get to those. Otherwise, I'm going to introduce some strategies to Western bumblebee identification, talk a little bit about some of the challenges, and then hopefully provide some strategies and solutions to work through those. And we will run a bunch of different bumblebee species under the microscope and try and use one or two primary resources to identify them. So off with the webcam. We do have 50 minutes or so, so let's go. So thanks for Sam and Claire for having me, ODA and various other agencies for their ongoing support. We have incredible support here in Oregon. And we have also an incredible group of master melitologists, citizen scientists that are contributing immensely to our knowledge of Western bees, of course, especially within Oregon, but also now within Washington State, where they have a Washington Bee Atlas, and Idaho, and maybe other states in the West in the future. Of course, the Oregon Bee Atlas is a citizen science initiative to document the bee biodiversity and those species' floral relations in the state. Our members generate hundreds of bee species and several hundred plant records every year, which culminates in around 30,000 pinned bee specimens that they catch, curate, label, identify, and then turn in to me. If you're interested in accessing our master melitologist modules, you can contact us on our Oregon Bee Atlas website. Not everyone has to become a master melitologist, but we do have all this online programming that can really advance your taxonomic learning. Now, in the last few years, since I've been working down here in Oregon, our members have generated around 10,000 netted bumblebee records from hundreds of different host plants, which is really valuable information for understanding why things are where they are and what they're doing and how we might help them. And then we do have extensive vein trap surveys, which helps us detect rare species and provide historical baselines for bumblebee communities. In the state, we have detected 22 species so far. Those are the ones in black here. The ones in red are species that have historical records. Of course, we haven't detected Franklini in about 17 years. It's likely that the records for Bombus turricola from Oregon are actually records of Bombus occidentalis, which was previously considered a subspecies of turricola. So those would be records for Bombus turricola, subspecies occidentalis. So it's not likely that there's legitimate records for turricola in the state. I have not seen any. Now, with respect to Bohemicus and Sucklei, I haven't seen any of those recently, nor have I seen any historical specimens. Both are frequently misidentified. They're both now very rare. So it's possible that they've occurred within the state historically, but I have yet to see any specimens, either historical or contemporary. Finally, Frigidus is either a boreal or a high elevation species that's infrequently encountered. It's also very commonly misidentified. I haven't seen any contemporary specimens or historical specimens of that for the state. So it may be here. We will see. Finally, there's some records for Pennsylvanicus, again, a species that's commonly misidentified. This is more of a, I would say the closest reasonable records would be Midwest. And although we do get some Midwest bee fauna into Eastern Oregon, I find it probably unlikely that Pennsylvanicus is here. We will see. Now, much like the presentation in the YouTube link, when I teach about bumblebee identification, I provide three strategies in increasing difficulty. So the first strategy is to just use the color forms, combine that with the maps in bumblebees in North America and the preferred habitat for these things. And that can usually, through a process of elimination, provide you with a short list of likely candidates. And if you do that, you'll find that your species is actually almost always within that short list. So it's a pretty effective way, but may not get a definitive answer for you. But it's a good way to learn how to observe these things, especially the color forms and the markings. The second strategy is we use a key to the subgenera that I've modified from Paul Williams' global subgeneric reclassification that he published. And so that's a short key that just sorts out the North American subgenera. Of course, this helps, again, delimit the possible list of species you might be dealing with, and we'll be looking at this today. And then finally, of course, you can use additional microscopic characters and color forms within the key to species within Paul Williams' Bumblebees of North America field guide.
I have a question really quick for Sam.
Yeah.
Do we have any gauge on how well marked for the bumblebees the subgenera are in Discover Life? I know in some groups we don't necessarily have every species, clicked with the radio dial for their subgenera.
Yeah,
or their subgenus.
we did the bumblebee guide, and we did it for all species known at the time in the 2000s with why am I forgetting her name? She's at University of Michigan now. Erica Tucker, and but really have not visited that again, and I don't believe we have subgenera specific ones. We were concentrating on going right to species, but I'm interested in Link's work, because now what we're doing is we're adding additional characters based on other people's dichotomous keys, and so we'll probably talk to you about that, but probably incorporate them into, because we just don't work out west. So a lot of these Western guides are, basically what we had from the Smithsonian and are relatively untested, but not tended like we do for the Eastern ones.
Well, I haven't used the Discover Life Bombus resources extensively. I would say mostly I've relied on the published dichotomous keys, Koch's Western bumblebees. And originally, Paul Williams had a key to the color forms of female bumblebees of the world, a matrix-based key on his Natural History Museum website. And until that became dysfunctional because the Java is so far outdated now, I found that to be a really good learning resource. So unfortunately, I can't really comment on the Discover Life resources very effectively. Here we'll be using Paul's subgeneric key that I've modified, and as well take a look at the species key that's in the back of the Bumblebees of North America identification guide pictured here. Now, throughout this talk, I will be showing lots of different of the color form templates from this guide, and I try to credit Paul wherever those occur. And so you'll see those, you'll see his little photo in the corner where I've used his template images. Now, in addition to that, although it's not specific to bumblebees, I have to mention Olivia and Joseph's work on the bees in your backyard and forthcoming common bees of Eastern and Western North America, as well as this great bumblebee poster that Joe compiled. It's just fantastic, beautiful stuff. So moving on, just to reiterate those 3 bumblebee identification strategies. The first is just an introductory strategy to learn the color forms, to use those maps and description of their preferred habitats, whether these are grassland species or alpine species, whether they're transboreal or southeastern. That information will allow you to delimit your species from the total list of North American species. And you'll end up with a short handful, 3 to 6 species of likely candidates for whichever bumblebee you manage to photograph or capture. And that's a good first stage for people getting into bumblebees. Of course, identification of bumblebees is difficult. We'll be looking at some serious mimicry complexes in a little bit. But just practice looking at those color forms and assessing them will serve you really well. Secondarily, we'll be looking at those subgeneric characters, which I'll introduce and which you should have all received a PDF of. And we'll flip through that initially, and then we'll run a bee or 2 through it just to show to demonstrate its utility and to just reintroduce those half dozen key characters that'll help you get your bumblebees to subgenus. And then finally, we'll run some bees through Paul's species key in the back of Bumblebees North America. So in order to assess the color templates, we'll have to transcribe what we see in our image or on our specimen onto the template. Now, Elaine covered this fairly well, so I won't get into all of the terminology of the tergites and so on, but just understand that you will have to transform something that's fairly variable into something that's rather static. And so it's not easy, but with a little practice, you can do it pretty accurately. So this is a pretty good representation of that bee. If we take a look, we can see that there's intermixed hairs on the shoulders, on the face, which is represented by the gray-brown color here. On the posterior thoracic band, dorsally, it's bright yellow, T1, bright yellow, T2, T3, orangey red, and then mostly black on the apical tergites. Now, one serious difference we see is that there is some yellow hairs laterally on the anterior part of T4. And so that's not represented here. And so, of course, the great challenge with bumblebees is that they're highly variable. Some species have dozens of identifiable color morphs, and that's the sticky part. And so, although we start with just this, single bee, we'll find that within the guide, you have to kind of reconcile the actual color form of the specimen with those static color forms that are represented in the guide. In order to represent all the subtle variations that would occur in nature or that you might encounter, of course, there might have to be hundreds of these templates for some of these individual species, and that's not really realistic. And so much like the Audubon bird guides, where they painted a picture to kind of represent the breadth of the appearance of some of these species, we have kind of far fewer templates than forms that might occur in nature. Now, if you do this, even in your backyard fauna, after some time, you'll come to recognize these things, and you might end up familiarizing yourself with the 6 to 12 species that might commonly occur in your backyard. And at any one location, especially in temperate and more northern parts of North America, we expect to see around 6 to 12 species at any one location. And so you might expect to find that many in your backyard. And so here is an example of one local fauna. These are the bumblebee species of the pond array in British Columbia. Now, this doesn't look too bad. There's some mimicry here, lots of just black and yellow species. But we do find that there's some variation among them. So you'd be able to sort some of these out pretty reliably just by going on the color forms, the geography, and the habitat. Now, when you get into some areas of Western North America, we're presented with this difficulty. We have many species that have many color forms approximating these images here. So this is from page 40 in the Bumblebees of North America, and these are just mimicry complexes 3 and 4. So what we find here is many bees with yellow faces, yellow heads, yellow shoulders, maybe a yellow T1 and yellow markings somewhere around T4, or a little bit more posteriorly. And so after you spend 10 years looking at bumblebees, you'll be able to recognize the differences between these and among them really quickly. But when you first start, the difference between this and this might drive you nuts. And so we're going to look at a few strategies to help you differentiate between this and this. Of course, one of the first ways to do that is to just identify them to subgenus. And this is another way of just delimiting the total number of options to shorten the potential list of species. What we find here is that all of these species on the top row are Pyrobombus. We have a few similar looking Bombus sensostricto subgenera species. We have kind of one Culumanobombus that fits within this complex, or at least one color form of one species. I'm sure some of you already know who this is. And then, of course, we have a few others, including some cuckoos. So I haven't included all of the Western species and forms that fall within this. Unfortunately, I don't have all of them on hand, but I do have lots of specimens and species on hand, and we'll work our way through a whole bunch of these. So like I said, once you've kind of familiarized yourself with the field guide, a good place to jump in is to identify your bee to subgenus. Now, you can do that with this document that I sent. No, not that one. Oh, those slides are just coming up next. But with the document I sent around, which is a modified key to the subgenera of North America. And so you can also use the first few couplets in the species key in the field guide, because it has a very similar structure to a key that is solely to subgenus level. So crack open that PDF and we'll just quickly look at some of the characters necessary to identify your bumblebees to subgenera. These are short keys for the females here. There's 7 couplets. And of course, this is modified from Paul's 2007 work, where he provided a simplified subgeneric classification for the bumblebees of the world. And that was really useful step in helping us sort out the global bumblebee fauna. Really cool work. So first off, we'll just look at that hind tibia and determine whether it has a corbicula or not. If it doesn't have a corbicula, then immediately we know that we're dealing with a cuckoo bumblebee in the subgenus Cytherus, and that's already in the West delimited to these 4 species. So although some of these look very similar to some of our non-cuckoo bumblebees, just by looking at that hind leg and acknowledging the sex, you'll be able to sort out that subgenus really quickly. Now, if it has a corbicula, you'll take a look at the anterior mandibular keel here, and you'll take a look at whether it is continuous with the edge of the mandible, that raised part. That keel is continuous with the edge of the mandible. And you'll take a look at the proximal posteriorly directed process on the hind basitarsus, whether it's long and pointy or whether it's shorter and wider. And additionally, you'll be re-examining the keel, the anterior keel on your bumblebee mandible to see if it's continuous with the raised edge here. If it's discontinuous, well, you have subgenus Bombus. And in the West here, that's just one species, Bombus nevadensis. And so by looking at 2 characters, you can help sort out this subgenus and species. Now moving on, if your bee had a continuous keel and a longer, narrower proximal posterior directed process on the hind basitarsus, you move on to couplet 3 and you'll take a look at that mid basitarsus to see if it has a sharp angle of 45 degrees or less, and we'll take a look at that and how to get a good view of it under the microscope. And you'll compare that to it being possibly rounded or with an angle of more than 45 degrees. Of course, if it is very angular, that narrows it down to Thoracobombus and Subterraneobombus. And to separate those 2 subgenera, we're just going to take a look at the punctation on the clypeus, whether it's mostly impunctate centrally here for Subterraneobombus or if it's punctured centrally with large and small punctured in the case of Thoracobombus. And this will help us sort out some more of these, very similar looking bumblebee color morphs. Now recall, if your mid basitarsus was rounded or had an angle of less than 45 degrees on the distal posterior corner, you're going to take a look at the clypeus to see how convex it is, as well as you'll take a look at the bottom corner of the mandible for a notch, and you'll look at how deep that notch is compared to its width and whether the clypeus is more convex or more flattened. If it does have a deep notch, which is an unusual character, so this is for more rare bees, you'll find that is Bombus sensu stricto, which is many of our species at risk, or Alpinobombus, which is maybe a future species at risk. And you can differentiate those 2 by the length of the ocular malar area or the cheek, the bumblebee cheek. Not to be confused with the genal area, which is behind or posterior to the eye, which is often also referred to as the cheek. Now, if your bee had a shallow notch or no notch on the bottom corner of the mandible, you're going to take a look at the ocelli. And although Paul uses this character of the orientation of the central ocellus to the top corner of the eye, I find that the better option here is to just assess the relative size and distance of the lateral ocellus to the eye. So here we find that the lateral ocellus is about 2 of its own diameters from the eye margin, and you can compare that to Culumanobombus, which has a relatively larger lateral ocellus, which is only about 1.5 of its diameters to the eye margin. So I'm sure some of you in the audience are well aware that Bombus rufosinctus has color forms that mimic nearly every other bumblebee. And so the quick way to figure out if this is a Bombus and a rufosinctus is to just take a quick look at those lateral ocelli and see if they're relatively large and close to the eye margin.
Like, do you use any measuring methods for that, or is this like an eyeballing it?
Oh, I totally eyeball it. And so you can
Great,
see
we love that.
here on the left, we have Bombus. On the right, we have Bombus. And you can see that this is 2 of its own diameters. And not only is it 2 of its own diameters, when you look at a Bombus lateral ocelli, they just look small. And so when you look at a Bombus lateral ocellus, it just looks larger. And so after you look at 10 or 20,000 of these, it just jumps out at you. But otherwise, you can see that it is about 1.5 lateral ocelli diameters to the eye margin here, and about 2 here. And we'll take a look at some of those, and I'll point that out in some specimens shortly. Finally, let's just take a quick breeze through the male characters. So you'll be happy to know that these are all genitalic characters. And so just a brief reintroduction to the male genital capsule morphology. We have gonobase, gonocoxa, the spatha, which I try not to look at because it's often kind of obscured. And importantly, the penis valves paired in the middle, the gonostylus laterally, and the vulsella. And so just moving through these characters, looking at the vulsella on the end of the gonococcite first, we find that Cytherus have simple vulsella with long or medium length branched hairs. The remainder of our bumblebee subgenera will have almost entirely simple hairs, a more heavily sclerotized vulsella, which is a much more complex structure. So almost all of our Cytherus species look just like this one, except for Bombus flavidus, which is a little more crescentic. Moving on. The easier way to recognize Bombus, rather than looking at the spatha here, is to just look at the antennal length and the general form and appearance, where Bombus are large males that are shaped kind of like a bullet. Huge eyes, relatively short antennae for a male bumblebee, and they're very robust. The remainder of our bumblebee subgenera have medium to long antennae and are not nearly as kind of robust, chunky, and bullet-shaped as a Bombus is. So if you have a bumblebee with longer antennae, you take a look at the penis valves. If they're widened, you're going to have one of our species at risk within the Bombus sensostricto or Bombus subgenus. And if they're more narrowed, we're going to move on, and it'll be another subgenus. So if you have those narrower penis valves, you're going to take a look and see whether they're straight on the top or whether they're curved out versus curved in. So of course, all of our Pyrobombus have very strongly hooked penis valves, hooked inwards, just like this one. And some of our other subgenera have more kind of scalloped or scooped shaped penis valves apically. So if it's straight or curved out, we'll go to couplet 5, and we'll find that if it has this little process on the gonostylus, that we're working with Thoracobombus. And of course, if it's lacking that narrow process, then we have Alpinobombus, certainly found either at high latitude or high elevation, and not yet known for Oregon. Now, if the penis valves were curved inwards and the gonostylus is a simple triangle, then we're dealing with Pyrobombus, and those genitalia are really easy to recognize once you have a little bit of experience comparing bumblebee penises. And then, of course, if the gonostylus is not a simple little triangle on top and it has some processes and it's a more complex shape, then it's going to be one of our remaining subgenera, which are subterranean bombus and culumanal bombus. Subterranean bombus, of course, have a angle or a process along their medial length, whereas culumanal bombus are straight. And we can take a look at lots of male bumblebee genitalia today if people are keen on that. So finally, if you have run your bees through the subgeneric key, which is not super easy, but with little practice, you'll be able to recognize the subgenera really quickly. This is where you can integrate, of course, all of your skill interpreting color forms, the geography, the habitat, and microscopic characters. Those that we learned in the subgeneric key, and of course, those that Paul uses to further elucidate the species within the species key in the North American bumblebee key. Of course, for the males, this is where you'll often need to dissect and examine the male genitalia. It can be a little nerve-wracking initially, but I think anyone can learn to dissect the male genitalia of bumblebees effectively and also learn to assess them effectively as well. So
before we transition, I have a few things from the chat that I wanted to. I was holding off. First thing in regards to the dissection, and we've talked about dissection before in here, but we want your hot take of if you don't do that right at the time of pinning, do you have a magical way that you can achieve that after the fact, or are we permanently disabled in that way?
All right, let me just try and. Here we go. Hi, folks.
Yeah.
So that's a good question. So there's a few different strategies, and it depends on what kind of samples you're dealing with. So when we work with vein trap samples, we have some of our technicians sort out all the bumblebees into a bumblebee subsample from our vein traps, and then we get a remaining subsample of all the other critters that were in the vein traps. And what we do is those are always stored in bottles of alcohol. And the way we process them is we blot the specimen, all those bumblebee specimens on paper towel to soak off as much as the alcohol from their bodies as possible. Then we'll blow dry them into a big fuzzy pyramid. You know, some of our vein trap samples can have upwards of 2,000 specimens in them. And so once we have that big fuzzy pyramid on my left, what I do is I sort them by eye and under the microscope into piles of species and caste. And so for any particular sample, we might have upwards of 14 or 16 species sometimes and multiple castes. So you end up with potentially like 30 piles from that one sample. And eventually what happens is you have some remainder of leftovers that are usually males that need to be dissected to be absolutely sure of the species identity. For Western vein trap samples, and for me, those are almost always male Vosnezensky and Caliginosus and the odd other species that I just don't recognize immediately. So what I do is, while they're still soft and pliable, having come out of a bottle of ethanol, I just will grab the specimen. They're not pinned. I'll just grab the specimen, put it under the scope, use a hooked pin to just pop out or expose the genitalia. I don't necessarily have to fully have the genital capsule come out. Often I just need to see the penis valves, especially if I have, say, 200 male Vos / Caliginosus. I just need to see the penis valves. In Caliginosus, they're wider and shorter, and in Vos, they're narrower and pointier and longer. And so really all I have to do is take a pin with a little hook or burr on it, pull on the apical tergites to expose the tip of the capsule, and I can see immediately those valves, and then I can throw it in the right pile. And so that's an easy way to do it in volume from vein traps. The alternative is, if you're dealing with pin specimens, You'll use some sort of container with some wet paper towels, no standing water, and you'll put those pin specimens on what I call a little life raft, which is a piece of foam that's sitting on top of these moist paper towels. And I'll leave these specimens in the humidity chamber for between 12 and 36 hours. After about 30 hours, depending on the temperature, you are starting to risk mold, which will grow exponentially. And so some specimens do take a little bit longer to humidify so that they're sufficiently pliable to be able to expose or extract the genitalia. And so after 24 or 30 hours, you really got to keep a super close eye on them to make sure that your specimens don't go moldy. But usually within 12 to 24 hours, they're sufficiently pliable. And so actually right now we can take a look and we can try and I'll show you my little tool that I use, which is just a pin with a burr on it. And we'll see if we can dissect some of these males, a little demonstration. And then we'll just...
That's going to be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a brief look at what you can see, because once you've done this a bunch, you don't really have to expose the whole genital capsule. There's not really any characters at the base of it that you need to see. You just mostly need to see, if you consider that a bumblebee penis is 4-pronged with 2 coccytes and 2 penis valves, you really just need to see the apical parts of those in order to get a confident determination on that specimen. So let's take a look here.
Link, while you're setting that up, just a quick question. If you have dried...
Lost you, Sam.
Going to pitch them after you do the ID, you're going to database them. Is it actually possible to crush the abdomen and extract the genital capsule in any way that's useful, or do you really still the relaxation first?
If you're not worried about keeping the specimen in decent quality, you could probably just rip the abdomen off, rip it in half, and then find the characters you need, and update your row of data with the taxonomic information and move on. In most cases, for most species, that individual specimen may not necessarily have to be preserved in good condition or preserved indefinitely. A lot of these species are common, widespread, and well known. And so, that's absolutely a possibility. Now, the hydration method, I always, I like to, one of my main motivators is just to produce lots of data. And so I'm very production focused. And so I know that I can dissect about 135 male bumblebees per hour. To give you a sense of, if you're doing a master's project and you have 2,000 bumblebees and 400 of them are males that you maybe need to dissect to assess them, well, with practice, you can probably do 100 in an hour once they've been humidified. And so every year, I'm identifying around 3,500 bumblebees that were collected in nets and pinned and labeled for the Oregon Bee Atlas. And a couple hundred of those I'll humidify and dissect. And that takes me, most of a morning to do our annual Bee Atlas bumblebees, the males. And so it's not too time consuming, I don't think. But, certainly, some destructive sampling, could be justified and effective.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like you've got it down.
Yeah, I think this is your explanation really helps quell some of the anxiety of, wow, will I ever be able to ID it if I don't have the genital capsule? So I just wanted to put these on the radar as we are going into microscope land. And I know that we have 20 minutes on the clock, but we can always come back to this if you're available, or stretch it a little bit longer. Well, I guess we all need to be somewhere at 2.
Yeah, for sure. We could do this for, 10 hours easily. So here's a male bumblebee. If you think you know what it is, put your answer in the chat. Subgenus, species, that's up to you. We can see that it has fairly long antennae. If we zoom in and take a look at the ocelli. Let's see. So, covered up by the hair a little bit, maybe a more lateral look will give us a better sense. Something like that. Give you a sense of the ocelli. And then, so this is a specimen that's been humidified for about 15 hours. You can see that the genital capsule is already, I'll zoom in a little bit, partly exposed. In fact, it's probably sufficiently exposed to get an ID on it. You can see the gonococcytes, that simple triangular volsella. I'll zoom in a little bit more and we'll get a good look at those inwardly hooked penis valves.
Wait, we're seeing that pretty dark. Is there a way? I know that if we probably add real light, it'll be too glossy, but is there a setting on there where you can adjust like the exposure or the brightness?
Just stand by a second. Probably not. Can you see?
We see it, just the contrast to see particular like sharpness is challenging.
Okay.
But we'll work with it.
I'll try and, so can you see my pointer?
We sure can.
So here's the penis valve. It is hooked inwardly. Yeah, this is not the best representation. And then on the other side, another hooked penis valve. This is the simple volsella here, simple triangular volsella. These penis valves are straight and then apically hooked inwards. So this is one that doesn't need to be dissected. You can see what you need to see. And if you were to run this through the key, now I want to show you my tool, which is, I take a number 2 pin. Let's see if I can zoom in on it. I take a number 2 pin and I just bend the tip ever so slightly on a piece of glass or some other extremely hard surface. Well, let me just zoom in on that. So ultimately, this is just a pin that has a tiny burr or hook on the end. Right about there.
Yeah, I think we see it well.
Yeah, so, you know, it's a simple tool. You can make as many as you want. And so I'll just provide a demonstration here of how you can pop your male bumblebee genitalia out. And you'll have to maybe just give me some guidance as we go, because I'll not be able to assess the quality super well as I'm doing this. I'll be looking through the microscope mostly. So I am holding the specimen between my index finger and thumb. Let's see here. These are the sternites. Here's the apical tergite. And once you have some practice looking at the structures, really all you need to do is maybe tease open the apex. So here, you can already see those 2 white lines are the penis valves. Zoom in.
This is a perfect shot. The light's a lot better. This is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so here you can, just by pushing on S6 or S7, apical sternite, and pulling on the apical tergite, you can immediately, let me zoom in even more. Immediately you can see those structures. You can see the penis valves, which are touching medially, so you can tease, so you can jam your pin in there, push them apart to get a better sense of where they're curved in apically. You can push the coccite around to get a lateral coccite to get a better sense of the shape of the volsella, whether it's complex, whether it's simple, whether it's just a simple triangle, like in this case. And you can also, again, tease that tergite around. Oh, I'm going to make sure I'm still on the screen here. To see whether those penis valves are straight, whether they have a process or an angle medially. Again, whether they're pointed apically or whether they are curved in or curved out. And so all the structures you want to see are right there, and I have not extracted that capsule. So I'm going to zoom out a bit, and then the way to pop out the genital capsule, and just if I fade off the screen, just tell me to move it a little lower or higher.
You're doing pretty good so far.
Okay. So
also,
what I
thank
do
you
is,
everyone for staying tuned for this. It's amazing.
Yeah, this is some high-level Bumblebee nerdery. So
we get
what
this
we do is
question a lot.
we take this bird pin and we'll slide it under the apical tergite. And then we'll turn it so that the bird grabs the back of the capsule, and then you can just pop it right out. And so we have laterally the gonococcytes, the white. They're not always white, but in this case, they look white. The penis valves, which are curved inwards apically. And so if you're to run this specimen through the key with those simple vocella, the hooked inwardly simple penis valves, you quickly find out that this is a pyrobombus. All right. Time does fly.
Thank you. Yeah, time does fly, and I'm gonna bring up two questions that are microscope questions, and then clearly we're gonna need to have you back because very relevant discussion.
Go ahead.
So we were just hoping, this is back up to the females, if we could, with the mandibles, locate the anterior versus posterior side, in guides, and would it be possible to see those mandible notch differences in couplet 5 under the microscope?
Oh yeah, and that's maybe one of the more difficult things. So let me just flip back to the key. Couplet 5. Right, so here. So what we're looking for is to differentiate Bombus sensostricto and albino Bombus. So these are the two subgenera that have a deep, wide notch. And we want to differentiate these from those subgenera that have either a shallow, wide notch or no significant notch, which are Culumanobombus and Pyrobombus. Now, this character is often very difficult to see. My primary advice is always that it may have a deep, wide notch if you collected it in the high alpine in the northwest, right? In which case, maybe you don't have to find that notch. For Bombus sensostricto, these are species you should be able to recognize. Of course, if you think you have something like a Franklini or a weird color form of occidentalis, which there are a bunch of, then yeah, maybe you need to take a closer look. So I do have a small horde of female occidentalis here. So let's take a look at one and see if we can spot that deep notch. Ooh. How's the reproduction?
It's pretty dark at the moment. Like
Okay.
I'm seeing basically a black screen.
Okay, we'll get there.
Sure will.
So some of these characters, they ultimately take a lot of practice in being able to orient the specimen effectively. So in this case, I took the labels off. I stuck the head of the pin into some clay. And now I have to basically look at this thing upside down and backwards. We're looking at the right side mandible.
Yeah, we really don't see anything besides black. Oh, there we go. That's improving the situation.
Okay, yeah, it'll take a moment to get enough light, and
For sure.
I'm not sure if, this is at 80x. We'll back out a bit. And so, so let's see. These are tongue parts here. This is the right side mandible. This is the anterior edge, and this is the posterior edge. So this is the edge that faces the underside of the head, which is this mess, the underside of the head. The eye would be above here, just to help orient you. And this is your notch. Finding these notches is really difficult. Often your specimen is like this, where the left side mandible here is buried under the right side mandible. And even the right side mandible, of course, is like pressed up against the tongue parts, which have some concreted pollen nectar goo. Makes it almost impossible to see. So what you want to do is, again, you can take your bird pin and you can see if you can pull on the mandible to get it to stick out a little bit. Of course, you risk that mandible snapping off and firing across the room, or just breaking and shattering off the edge as you pull on it. One trick that I often do for mandibles that are sticking out really nicely is to actually assess the notch looking from the inside. So here we're looking at the notch from the outside, and the reproduction here is just not ideal. And so I'll find a mandible here where we can kind of look at it from both sides. I'll find one that's nicely exposed. It's probably not going to be one of these subgenera of interest. Stand by a minute here. Of course, this is not just a problem for bumblebees, but this is often a problem for many species in the family Megachelidae. We often are looking at mandibles on Osmia or Megachile.
That's where we usually have this rehydration conversation. So are you also, is this also successful for the mandibles, that rehydration, or are they a little stickier in your experience?
I'm terrible with if I only have one specimen of something and I really have to see the mandible, that's unfortunate for me because I'm a butcher. And probably it's, the head's going to fly across the room, or there's going to be some sort of tragedy. And so I'll do my best to compare other characters for cases where I have like a single specimen. I don't have a ton of good guidance. I have in the past hydrated a lot of megachelids that needed the mandibles assessed. So here's a Bombus. Again, we're looking at the mostly right side mandible, and you can see that there is a shallow, wide notch here. Of course, if you have reference material, it's invaluable. You can see the left side mandible underneath, but it's not quite good enough to be able to assess. Let me try and line it up here. It's not quite good enough to try and assess it from the inside, like I was saying before. Yeah, just can't quite get the good angle on that. Let's see if I have another one. Quite a few bees sitting here. So one of the advantages of collecting into ethyl acetate is that the bees almost always perish with their tongues fully exposed and their mandibles open. No, you can't see on that one. The trade-off is that collecting into ethanol, which I've done a lot when I'm netting, I just collect straight into ethanol. The trade-off is that the bee usually perishes with the mandibles closed and with the tongue retracted. Now, a couple things I wanted to show you before we go, because I did bring up that mimicry complex, is just to provide some examples of some bees in the West that fall within that mimicry complex. Where are we here? So if you think you know what this is, write the name down in the chat. Of course, this one falls within that complex, and so one of the primary strategies is to just quickly assess some of those subgeneric characters. So the ocelli, they look smaller and a little more distant there. Take a look at that malar length, obscured by the foreleg. So take a look at this one. Get a good look there that the malar length is quite short. See if I can left hand the specimen, right hand the mouse. So it only extends to about here, very short malar length relative to its width. What else might we look on this specimen? We can look at that hind leg basitarsus. Has a longer, narrower proximal, posteriorly directed process here. On the mid-leg basitarsus, you'll recall it could be rounded or pointed. So let's see if we can see that. It's tucked up under there. Let's see. Oh, now it's obscured by the tarsi, so it's in there. You can't quite make it out effectively, but it's rounded. Anyone have any guesses for this critter?
Y'all are empowered to unmute.
Type it in the chat. For a lot of people, this will be the first specimen you've seen of this thing. Now's your chance. So that was a worker Bombus franklini.
That's exciting.
So let's take a look at, oh.
I am going to let you know it is 2 o'clock. I know you, I, and Sam have a link to follow. But also if there's some last minute stuff, we're right here.
Yeah, well, I could probably do 2 more hours of running bees through keys, but this is, I think, a good start, a good little review for strategies. And if there's any questions in the chat, maybe we could answer a few of those and then sign off.
Yeah, this has been a really great different approach than we've worked through before. And I really hope that we can schedule something for some more microscope time next time. I think we've addressed the chat has been, we've mostly been active talking about rehydrating. And I don't have any questions that I seem to have missed. But again, now's your time, or you can unmute and speak to Link directly.
While people are waiting, this is Sam, and I'll just say that, Link, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule of pulling genitalia to talk to us. And we really also value just...
Oh, Sam disappeared there.
We don't know what he values. Sam, we lost you at values.
Go different ways. Oh, you lost me at value? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying I value what you've said. And the different approaches are a valuable contribution to how people learn about identifications, because there's not one path forward. So this is great.
Yeah, bumblebee identification is difficult, and it is really a matter of using all of the resources at hand and reference collections where they might be available. So I guess
reference collection is a good one.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I guess maybe we'll do this again in several weeks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this was
Thanks, Link.
fantastic. There's lots of thank yous coming through.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.
We'll
And
see
Sam,
you in a
can
minute.
Yeah.
What?
I also don't seem to have that link stored on my calendar in an easy way. So can one of you please
It
send it
doesn't,
to me?
yeah, the links don't show up for the RCN on your calendar. So
Yeah.
I've got an email with it in and I'll pass it on. And
Thanks.
Link, do you have your link to the meeting?
I don't know. I'll have to dig around for it.
All right, I'll send it to both you guys.
Thank you.
Easy
Right.
peasy, lemon
Right.
squeezy. Thanks, friends.
Bye.
Bye.